There's a moment when the noise you've been deafening yourself with finally implodes. A specific alignment of internal and external pressures, a timing that cannot be outrun. You've tried to outpace it, to outthink it, to outperform it, but the shame remains, a phantom limb. Your numbness, your armor, the relentless performance, they were never meant to fix the pain. They were built to keep the original betrayal hidden, to preserve a fragile sense of self. But the edifice is cracking. The foundations, laid in haste and fear, are crumbling. Healing implies a return to a prior state, a state you've already proven impossible to reclaim. Instead, we must descend into its architecture to understand the meaning you carved from the raw pain. Jung glimpsed this, understood the fractured self, the shadow lurking in the periphery. Chiron, the wounded healer, knew intimately that the arrow's poison, unacknowledged, becomes the very spring from which wisdom flows. This is not about mending the tear, but about understanding the fabric it has warped. The invitation is not to closure, but to descent, to embrace the terrifying truth that the part you've exiled never ceased its agonizing cry. It waits now, not for balm, but for recognition, for the courage to finally hear its long and silent scream. This is the timing that cannot be escaped, the internal clock striking an hour of profound reckoning. But what happens when the walls you built to protect yourself only serve to imprison, and the noise you've created drowns out every whisper of your true self? In the next section, we'll expose the birth of this performance armor. And real quick, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more videos. Now let's keep going. The early fear wasn't just about what happened, it was about what it meant. You built a fortress, brick by careful brick, from the shards of an shattering experience. This performance armor, this ceaseless striving for approval, was your first and most elaborate defense. It was the role you adopted, the character you played, to avoid the gaze of that unbearable reality. The constant need to impress, to be good, to be enough. It was the armor's gleam. It was the quiet calculation behind every word, every gesture, ensuring no one saw the trembling underbelly. You perfected the art of the outward show, mistaking its sheen for an impenetrable shield. This wasn't about strength. It was about a desperate pact with the void, a promise to never falter. And in this tireless effort, you became a puppeteer, pulling strings of your own making. The script was written by a child, desperate to appease an unseen judge, an absent authority. The armor became so seamless, so ingrained, that you forgot you were wearing it. You believed the role was you. The praise was validation, the criticism, a terrifying glimpse behind the curtain. It was a complex dance, a delicate balance on the precipice of exposure. But the seams are showing, the once polished surface now dull with the weight of its own deception. This armor was never about true protection, but about the avoidance of a deeper truth. What happens when the desperate effort to keep the self hidden only serves to suffocate its very possibility? In the next section, we will dissect the original rupture where meaning, not the event itself, became the wound. The physical sensations dull, the sensory details blur into a generalized haze, but the meaning you etched into its wake, that remains, a scar etched onto the soul. This is the crucial distinction, the pivot point that separates genuine trauma from its spectral echo. It wasn't the falling that broke the glass, it was the narrative you wove around the shattering. The whispered accusations in your own mind, the self-blame, the shame that bloomed in the silence afterward. Nietzsche observed, "He who fights monsters should see to it that he himself does not become a monster." And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. This gaze, this prolonged contemplation of the wound, carved its shape onto your inner landscape. You didn't just witness the event. You became its interpreter, its historian, its prisoner. The story you told yourself about what happened, the meaning you assigned to your pain, became the cage. This narrative, forged in the crucible of vulnerability, became the master key to your subsequent actions. You began to live out the script, not as an observer, but as the reluctant protagonist. Every choice, every reaction was colored by the meaning you'd already assigned. It was an unconscious obedience to a narrative that promised safety but delivered only self-imprisonment. This self-imposed meaning, this interpretation of events, is the true architecture of suffering. It's the internal echo of the original rupture, a constant reminder of a perceived failure. But what if the meaning you imprinted onto that initial event wasn't the final word? And what if that wound is not just a scar but a gateway? In the next section, we will explore the unseen crown of the Chiron wound. Chiron, the centaur, bore a wound that would not heal, a poisoned arrow lodged deep within his immortal flesh. His agony was not in the initial injury, but in its perpetual presence, a constant hum of suffering. This is the paradox of the Chiron wound, a concept that resonates deeply within the human psyche. It's the pain we carry that reframes our entire existence, shaping our interactions, our perceptions, our very being. In the myth, Chiron could not die from his wound, but he could not escape its pain. He was a figure of immense wisdom and compassion, but also of profound, unyielding suffering. This is the psychic imprint, the ancestral memory of an injury that has become intertwined with identity. We see this wound not just in grand tragedies, but in the subtle hesitations, the irrational fears, the deep-seated insecurities that plague us. The unacknowledged pain becomes a phantom limb, a constant source of discomfort that we learn to live with, even to ignore. But its presence is undeniable, subtly influencing every decision, every relationship. This wound, unhealed, becomes not just a burden, but a perverse kind of crown. It's a badge of honor worn by the suffering, a symbol of resilience born from perpetual pain. It grants a unique perspective, a depth of empathy born from shared experience, yet it also isolates. The Chiron wound teaches us that some pains are not meant to be eradicated, but understood. They become part of the tapestry of who we are, coloring our vision, shaping our journey. But what happens when this unhealing wound dictates our flight from deeper connection, and how does this ingrained suffering manifest as an architectural blueprint for our inner lives? In the next section, we'll explore the architecture of numbness. The architecture of numbness is a vast, silent city built where feeling used to reside. Imagine vast, empty halls where laughter once echoed, now filled with a hollow, resonant stillness. This is not peace, but the absence of sound, the deliberate silencing of a once vibrant symphony. This is the internal city you've constructed to insulate yourself from the raw impact of existence. Each wall is thick, layered with years of avoidance, of distractions, of carefully curated apathy. The streets are paved with what-ifs and should-haves, leading nowhere but back to themselves. An early betrayal, a profound disappointment, a societal decree too heavy to bear, forced you to seek refuge. And in this refuge, the senses began to dull. The vibrant reds faded to muted grays. The piercing notes softened to a dull drone. The body became a stranger, its signals ignored, its whispers of discomfort overridden by the drive for stability. Emotions, once vivid rivers, became sluggish streams, their currents barely perceptible. Fear, joy, sorrow, they were all filed away in the municipal archives, deemed too volatile for everyday life. This deliberate suppression, this architectural design of emotional void, has its own insidious logic. But like any structure built on avoidance, it begins to decay, its foundations weakening. The very things you've tried to numb are the essential currents of life itself. They are the signals that guide you, the colors that make the world visible. And in building this city of emptiness, you haven't escaped pain, you've only lost the capacity to feel anything at all. This carefully constructed shell, though seemingly protective, prevents genuine connection and growth. But when the silence of your internal city becomes deafening, and the inability to feel threatens to consume you, what primitive forces are awakened from the depths of your psyche? In the next section, we delve into Jung's abyss, where the shadow becomes flesh. Jung spoke of the shadow not as mere negativity, but as the unacknowledged totality of the self. It is the disowned part, the aspect you've cast into the darkness, fearing its power, its perceived ugliness. And in your fear, it festers, growing in the fertile soil of the unconscious. It is the inverse of your conscious persona, the dark twin you've tried to outrun. When the light of awareness is withdrawn, the shadow begins to animate, to take on a life of its own. It's the impulse you can't explain, the irrational anger that flares, the self-sabotage that appears out of nowhere. These are not random occurrences, they are the shadow manifesting, forcing its way into your awareness. It's the part of you that craves what you deny, that desires what you forbid. You see it in others, you condemn it, you rail against its presence in the world. But what you revile outside is merely a projection of the part you've exiled within. This unacknowledged aspect, denied its rightful place in the psyche, begins to gain weight. It's like a dark star pulling in all the repressed energies, all the denied desires and resentments. And when the pressure becomes too great, when the shadow can no longer be contained, it becomes flesh. It erupts into your life, not as a whisper, but as a roar, disrupting your carefully constructed reality. This is the abysmal descent Jung warned of, the confrontation with the parts of yourself you've deemed unacceptable. The shadow, when denied, does not disappear. It only waits, gathering strength in the darkness. But what happens when this primal shadow begins to speak through your deepest insecurities and your most irrational impulses, mirroring the very abandonment it fears? In the next section, we will examine spiritual bypassing as devotional cowardice. Spiritual bypassing is the art of using spiritual practices to sidestep or avoid difficult emotions and unresolved issues. It's the quick fix to the soul, a shallow dip in the sacred pool meant to wash away the persistent stain of the real. The intention might be noble, the pursuit of higher truths, but the execution is a profound avoidance. It's meditating away your anger, affirming your way out of grief, or spiritualizing your way past a traumatic event. The mantra becomes a shield, the incense a veil, the pilgrimage a means of escape. The suffering is not confronted, it is artfully sidestepped, transmuted into lofty, ethereal concepts. It's a fear of the messy, the chaotic, the deeply human parts of ourselves that refuse to be polished into perfection. The symbol of the divine becomes an excuse to flee the gritty reality of the self. Kierkegaard understood this flight, this desperate attempt to escape the existential dread through a manufactured transcendence. The greatest danger, that of losing oneself, is transformed into the greatest caution. And in this caution, this hypervigilance against feeling, the true self is lost. The pain points, the areas that demand our attention, are painted over with a veneer of cosmic understanding. We declare ourselves above it, evolved, or energetically aligned, effectively disconnecting from the very ground of our being. This bypass creates a hollow resonance, a spiritual facade that crumbles under the slightest pressure of authentic life. It's a form of spiritual self-deception, mistaking detachment for enlightenment. The wound remains, unaddressed, festering beneath the silken robes of supposed spiritual attainment. This avoidance ultimately leaves us more broken, more disconnected than before. The spiritual path is not an escape route from reality, but an immersion into its very depths. But what happens when the pursuit of spiritual elevation becomes a clever disguise for an unwillingness to descend into the difficult truths of our own lives? In the next section, we'll see how the mirror is no longer external. The mirror you've consulted for years, the one that reflected the approval or disapproval of others, is shattering. It was always a flawed reflection, a distorted image cast by the expectations and judgments of the external world. You sought validation in its warped surface, mistaking fleeting glances for enduring truth. But the cracks are widening, the pieces falling away, revealing something far more profound and terrifying. This isn't about external appearances anymore, about the masks you painstakingly crafted. The true reflection is no longer outside, it is emerging from within, demanding to be seen. You've spent a lifetime trying to project an image, to curate a public self that would be acceptable, even admired. But the gaze you've avoided, the one you've projected outwards onto others and onto society, is now turning inward. The judgment you feared has found its truest target within your own psyche. The familiar contours of your constructed identity are dissolving, replaced by something raw, something untamed. The external validation that once fueled you has withered, leaving an aching void. This is the beginning of the true self-inquiry, the uncomfortable but necessary confrontation with your own interiority. Now, the only gaze that matters is your own, and it is a gaze you have long avoided. This internal mirror doesn't offer flattery or condemnation. It offers a stark, unvarnished truth. It reflects the exiled parts, the forgotten desires, the unacknowledged pain. It's a mirror that doesn't lie, and its clarity can be overwhelming, even frightening. But in this unflinching reflection lies the possibility of genuine self-recognition, a shedding of the borrowed identities that kept you small. This redirection of the gaze from the outer world to the inner landscape is a profound transition. But what raw and unsettling truths will be revealed when the external validation dries up, leaving only the echo of your own inner judgment? In the next section, we confront the silence you mistook for peace. It was the absence of noise, the cessation of external demands, a temporary reprieve from the clamor of life. But this silence, deliberately cultivated, was also the smothering of your own inner voice. It was the quiet cave where you hid from the storm, not to find solace, but to escape the need to respond. The world outside might have quieted, but the internal cacophony only grew louder, muffled by your manufactured calm. It holds the deadened aspects of yourself, the vibrant energies you've chosen to inter rather than integrate. Every urgent whisper, every suppressed emotion, every unexpressed truth lies buried within its depths. Blake wrote, "The silence of the oppressed is by no means peaceful, something in them is still alive." And that something, that insistent flicker of life, struggles against the suffocating blanket of your chosen quiet. It is a silence enforced, not naturally occurring, a deliberate act of self-negation. You believed you were finding peace by shutting down, by withdrawing from the fray. But in doing so, you severed your connection to the very pulse of existence. The world continued to spin, to demand engagement, to offer its joys and its sorrows, and you remained outside, an observer in your own life. This enforced silence is a breeding ground for resentment, for a growing inner hollowness. It convinces you that the outside world is solely responsible for your discomfort, rather than acknowledging your own role in creating this internal void. This profound silence, maintained as a shield, has also become a prison. But can this self-imposed stillness truly shield you when the echoes of what you've suppressed begin to reverberate in the emptiness, and what ancient patterns of collapse are etched into your very being when you've silenced your own voice? In the next section, we'll explore archetypes as inherited collapse. We carry within us the archetypes, the primal patterns of human experience, not as individual choices, but as inherited blueprints. They are the echoes of our ancestors, the psychic residue of countless lives lived and lessons learned or unlearned. When these archetypes collapse, when their vital energy becomes distorted or suppressed, a collective failure cascades through generations. Think of them as the deep currents beneath the surface of consciousness, shaping our instincts, our desires, our fears in ways we rarely comprehend. The archetype of the warrior, for instance, gone awry, becomes not courage but aggression. The mother archetype, when fractured, manifests not nurturing but suffocating control. This inherited collapse occurs when the vital, dynamic energy of an archetype is repressed or misunderstood. We inherit not just a family history, but a psychic legacy, a pattern of how certain energies have been handled and potentially failed. This failure isn't a personal failing, but a generational one, a pattern of maladaptation to life's fundamental challenges. When a core archetype collapses within a lineage, subsequent generations are born into its shadow, struggling with its distorted legacy. they might unconsciously reenact the original collapse, perpetuating the cycle. This can manifest as a pervasive sense of futility, a collective feeling of being stuck. It's as if the very structures of understanding and engaging with the world have crumbled. We find ourselves navigating a landscape where the old maps no longer guide us, where the inherited tools for living have broken. The archetypes are meant to be living, dynamic forces, guiding us through the phases of life. When they are disrupted, they leave voids, and these voids are filled with anxiety, with confusion, with a sense of existential dread. This is the psychic architecture of collapse, a structure built from the ruins of misused or forgotten primal energies. We are not simply individuals experiencing personal pain, but inheritors of vast psychic landscapes shaped by the successes and failures of those who came before us. But when these ancient blueprints of survival and flourishing begin to break down within us, what primal currency does the deep, unacknowledged part of ourselves begin to trade in, and how does this shadow manifest through the relentless cycle of repetition? In the next section, we will delve into the shadow's currency, which is repetition. It's the loop you can't escape, the mistake you keep making, the relationship dynamic that always ends the same way. This isn't random chance. It's the shadow trying to force recognition, to pay its dues in the only currency it understands. When a part of you is exiled, it doesn't cease to exist. It festers, driven by an unfulfilled urge. The shadow, denied its expression in conscious life, seeks every opportunity to manifest, to say, "I am still here." And it does so through recurring patterns, through those familiar, often painful, scripts that play out in your life. You find yourself in the same arguments with different people, drawn to similar problematic situations, or repeating the same self-defeating behaviors. This is the shadow broadcasting its presence, using the familiar as a tool for communication. It's a distorted echo of something vital that was denied, an attempt to complete a circuit that was broken. It's like a broken record, stuck on a particular groove, playing the same few bars over and over. The music might be unpleasant, even unbearable, but it's the only music the broken part knows how to produce. And each time the cycle repeats, it's a desperate plea for acknowledgement, for a different response, for a chance to be integrated. The pain of repetition is the soul crying out, not for punishment, but for a change in the pattern. It's the shadow's way of saying, you cannot heal what you do not face. You cannot move forward by repeating the past. This endless cycle isn't a sign of futility, it's a sign of something still striving, still seeking resolution. The shadow uses repetition to highlight what has been overlooked, what has been left unresolved. It forces you to look at the same wound from slightly different angles until you are compelled to acknowledge its presence. It's a relentless teacher, using the familiar to point towards the unfamiliar, the hidden, the unintegrated parts of yourself. This insistent rhythm of repetition is a hallmark of the unacknowledged self banging on the door of consciousness. But what if this endless loop isn't just about repeating past hurts, but about something even deeper being etched into your very identity, a fundamental shame that builds your sense of self? In the next section, we'll unpack the shame that built the identity. The identity you hold, the sense of who you are, is often built upon a foundation of shame. Not the shame of a specific action, but a pervasive, insidious shame that whispers, you are inherently flawed. This is the bedrock upon which you've constructed your defenses, your persona, your very sense of self. It's the feeling of being fundamentally wrong, of not measuring up, of being an imposter in your own life. This shame doesn't arise from outward judgment alone. It is an internalized narrative of inadequacy. It's the echo of early experiences where your authentic self was met with disapproval, conditional love, or neglect. This deep-seated shame becomes the invisible architect of your personality. It dictates your fears, your aspirations, your relationships, and your deepest insecurities. You spend your life trying to compensate for this perceived flaw, to prove your worth, to outrun the feeling of being fundamentally less than. The performance armor we spoke of earlier. It's woven from the threads of this shame. The constant need for validation, the fear of judgment, the compulsive people-pleasing, these are all strategies to conceal the shameful core. You believe that if everyone else sees your perfection, they won't see the hidden defect. This shame is insidious because it masquerades as humility or self-awareness, but it is, in fact, a paralyzing force that prevents genuine self-acceptance. It makes vulnerability feel like an invitation to exposure and authenticity a dangerous risk. You become defined by your perceived shortcomings, by the parts of yourself you try to hide. This is the tragic irony of a life built on shame. The more you try to erase it, the more it solidifies who you believe yourself to be. It's a prison of your own making, built with the bricks of self-condemnation. And as long as this shame operates beneath the surface, your identity remains fragile, dependent on external validation, and constantly threatened by the fear of exposure. But this seemingly solid identity, forged in the fires of shame, is merely a temporary structure. What awaits when this constructed self begins to crumble, and what is the nature of the journey that lies beneath? In the next section, we'll explore the descent that is nearer than you think. It is the shedding of the identities, the roles, the carefully constructed self that no longer serve. It is an invitation to surrender, not to defeat, but to a deeper truth beyond illusion. You have been preparing for this descent, perhaps without even realizing it. Every shattered expectation, every failed attempt to maintain the facade has been a gentle tug, a whisper coaxing you downward. The resistance you feel is merely the ego clinging to its familiar territory, afraid of the unknown. This process is often terrifying because it strips away the masks you've worn your entire life. The roles of the victim, the hero, the martyr, the perfect child, they all begin to crumble. What remains is the raw, unadorned self, stripped bare of its defenses and its pretensions. It is a journey into the heart of your own darkness, into the unseen realms of your psyche. But this darkness is not an absence of light. It is the fertile ground from which new growth can emerge. Here, in the stillness of the relinquished self, lies the possibility of true freedom. Think of it as entering a sacred tomb, not to mourn the dead, but to discover what lies buried within. The old structures must be broken down to make way for something new, something more authentic. This is the alchemical process, the transformation of lead into gold, of the ordinary into the extraordinary. It is the courageous act of letting go, of trusting that beneath the surface of your constructed identity lies a vibrant, resilient core. It is an acknowledgement that the structures of the ego, however secure they may seem, are ultimately impermanent. The fear of this descent is the fear of annihilation, of losing oneself. The journey downward is not a retreat, but a profound exploration of what lies beneath the conventional understanding of self. This plunge into the unknown offers a glimpse of a reality that transcends the superficial. But this profound unraveling of the self, this necessary descent, leads us to confront the very essence of who we are beyond the labels. In the next section, we will explore the forgotten name beneath the roles. Beneath the layers of roles and titles, the labels society assigns and you adopt, there is a forgotten name. It is the name whispered by the soul at the moment of your first breath, before the world began to tell you who you should be. A name that holds your unique essence, your inherent worth, your unalterable truth. It is the sound of your original vibration, the frequency of your authentic being. The shame, the performance, the fear, they have all conspired to silence this name, to make it unintelligible even to yourself. You have been so busy playing the parts that you've forgotten the actor who inhabits them. This forgotten name is not a badge to be earned or a title to be claimed. It exists in the quiet spaces between your thoughts, in the moments of genuine presence. Nietzsche spoke of becoming who you are, and central to this is reclaiming that original, forgotten name. It is the essence that predates all conditioning, all programming, all external influence. It is to move from being an object of circumstance to a subject of your own destiny. It requires listening beyond the clamor of the world and the internal critic. It is a name not spoken by the tongue, but felt in the bones, recognized in the deepest core of your being. It is the primordial sound of recognition, the echo of your own divine spark. And the forgetting of this name is the root of so much spiritual and psychological alienation. We spend our lives searching for who we are, often by consulting external mirrors and seeking external validation. But the answer lies not in what others call you, but in the forgotten name that resonates from within. But what happens when the act of remembering this forgotten name requires confronting the part of yourself that was silenced, the part that has been screaming for years? In the final section, we will attend to the part that kept screaming. Beneath the numbness, beyond the performances, through the layers of learned silence, it persisted. It is a part to be listened to be finally acknowledged in its primal state. It is the screaming child, the wounded beast, the exiled spirit, holding onto its truth with fierce, unyielding intensity. You have tried to drown it out, to sedate it with distractions and platitudes. It existed in the cracks of your composure, in the moments of existential dread, in the deep, unarticulated ache of your being. This is the authentic self, the core of your experience that was too potent, too wild to be contained by the structures you built. It screamed its protest against the betrayals, against the injustices, against the very act of being silenced. Its scream was not of desperation, but of an unwavering insistence on its own existence. Jung understood this vital force, the psychic energy that demands expression, that will not be extinguished. It is the animating principle that seeks to reclaim its rightful place in the conscious mind. To ignore it is to remain incomplete, to live a life perpetually haunted by an unacknowledged presence. It is the sound of life refusing to be extinguished, of spirit demanding its due. This part of you has been waiting, patiently, ferociously, for the moment you're finally willing to stop running. To face, it is to embrace the fullness of your humanity, the messy, vibrant, often contradictory totality of who you are. It is to give voice to the voiceless, to honor the parts of yourself that have been denied their rightful expression. This is not the end of a journey, but the beginning of a profound dialogue with your truest self. This screaming part, this unacknowledged truth, is not an enemy but a vital messenger. Its cry is the sound of authenticity, the raw and beautiful echo of your being. Now that concludes this video. Make sure to subscribe for more videos and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new video. We'll see you in the next one.